Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Like others, I very much welcome this document and the publication of it. I see it very much as an attempt to bring more focus to the work of Borna Gaelic and the national plan that has been previously agreed, and to try and drive very specific actions and increase language acquisition more quickly than would otherwise be the case. And I welcome all of that. I have to say, when I reflect on my own time as Gaelic Minister, and I know from comments that were made to me that the board has not had an easy start to life, to put it mildly. Many key personnel changes at key moments in time, and currently still looking for a chief executive. And I know the frustrations of many in the Gaelic community about the progress that the board was able to make. And one criticism I used to hear was that everything was a priority. And now that's easy to understand, because when you're trying to save a language, there's an awful lot to be done. So if this report is successful in providing a better focus for the board and its work, then I very much welcome that. However, I also say that it's still pretty broad. And there's a kind of curious mix in it of highly specific and measurable outcomes on the one hand, and not at all specific or measurable outcomes on the other. And in some key respects, it's highly ambitious. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's important to be ambitious for the language, but I also wonder about the realism and the achievability of some of the targets. I want to come back to that in a minute. But having said that, I very much wish what's in the document well, and the objectives that are there set out in their broad intention. Now, it's a very big challenge to try and reverse the decline of a language, but I have to say that I remain more optimistic than ever about the prospects of doing that. I've been reflecting on, in the way that Ted Brocklebank did, and I'm going to cover some of the same ground actually. It must come of men of our age, although I'm much younger than Ted, as you can see. But I've been reflecting over the last 25 years, of which I've had some involvement in Gaelic development. Now, 25 years ago, Gaelic development as a concept was in its infancy. And I very well remember visiting the offices of Uncommon Gaelic in Church Street in Inverness, and talking to the then officials there, and all the work and focus on the mod, but also in supporting some adult learning programmes. There was a number of Gaelic societies that they also supported across the Highlands and Islands, and indeed in Glasgow and other cities. I also remember the work in Grampian Television. I paid due tribute to Ted Brocklebank for the very important role that he played in that, and the BBC doing some very important programming on Gaelic back in those days, even if at times it went out very late at night or indeed early in the morning, potentially. And I've also watched and helped a bit with the growth of Gaelic medium education. And I remember very much the scepticism about Gaelic medium education in the early days, not least from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Education. And I'm glad to see that that has changed over the years. And I've watched it grow and grow. Now it's over 60 Gaelic medium education units. I've seen the playgroup movement start and grow, and that's to be encouraged. The first secondary school that Polly McNeill talked about in her constituency in Glasgow, a relatively recent development, but also important. The first standalone primaries beginning to emerge. Yes, I'll give way.
I thank the member for giving way. Does he recognise actually one of the arguments for Gaelic education is actually about bilingualism and the strength it can bring, and I think that shows the movement and progress we've made in recent years, of which he was part as previous education minister.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and Alistair Allen's a good example of that. Once you've mastered one language, you can master many. It becomes that much easier, and that's a very good thing in a modern European society, let alone in our wider world society. The first standalone primaries are now emerging. I've seen teacher numbers in Gaelic medium growing and growing, even though there are still challenges. As Ted Brocklebank has referred to, I've also seen and helped a bit at various times with the odd check when different roles that I've performed, not personal check I have to say, but government checks or council checks. I've seen Salmarostig grow from that small, rather dilapidated barn into the absolutely superb campus it is by any standards anywhere in the world that it is today. And I equally pay tribute to Sir Ian Noble in the work that he's done there. And Salmarostig is not just a further education college, it's a centre for a whole series of activities around Gaelic that's very important. And as you say, the whole area of Skye regenerated in the back of that. And then the spin-offs from Salmarostig that we've seen through Cannon, through Dover and Docus, and so on. Lots of projects spun out from that. I've seen Common Gaelic grow and develop over the years. Clee be developed. Common Apparent be developed over the years. Storlin publishing books and other publications supporting education and wider access to language growing over the years. New forms of adult learning, and Ulplan that Alistair Allen referred to, an important part of that. I also wanted to mention Runrig, the impact of Runrig in modernising pride in the language, a particularly important time, and the wider culture. And again, the West Highland Free Press, which is about the people, the land and the language as its sort of theme. I also watched the development of Yorpa, which is giving access to a fantastic programme about contemporary European affairs, but done through the medium of Gaelic, the development of the Fashion movement, which has had a huge impact on access to the language, umpteen arts projects, of which Mike Russell, I remember, was part in a much earlier time in the US when he was much slimmer than he is today, but nonetheless doing important work there. And MG Alba that people are talking to, our own Language Act, the Board of Gaelic is a statutory body now with language plans. There's a vibrancy about Gaelic development that we've never seen before, and I think that's all to be welcomed. And there's a lot of capacity from all of those institutions and organisations that I've mentioned. And they're all there to address the decline that we all want to see addressed in Gaelic, and that's where my optimism comes from. Now, part of the process of having Board na Gaelic as a statutory body was to try and get all those resources marshalled and moving in the same direction, marching together, and the Board to provide some leadership for that. Now, I hope very much that this new strategy will help achieve that, and if it does so, then we can look forward to the number of new speakers growing at a faster rate than the indigenous language speakers are dying out. And that's the crucial changeover that we need to see taking place. Now, I referred earlier to ambitious targets in this report. I want to illustrate that very briefly by reference to three things: teacher numbers, pupil numbers, and the specific grant. By any standards, achieving a 100% increase year on year in teacher numbers is ambitious. It's not the first time we've had a recruitment initiative. I had one as well. And it's a real tough challenge to deliver that. Particularly as it appears that there are very few current vacancies in Gaelic medium in the system. I was checking websites about that through my office today. And therefore, why would you train as a Gaelic medium teacher if there are no vacancies? I think there are challenges there that I hope ministers will help drive and help improve the process. Equally, increasing pupil numbers by 15%, absolutely agree with the objective, not going to be easy to achieve in the short term unless we've got the teachers. So these things are obviously connected. And that too, that increasing by 15% that provision, is predicated to some extent at least on the Gaelic-specific grant being used for expanding the provision. Now, it's always been the intention of Gaelic-specific grant to do that. And some of it has helped with that, but a large part is mainstream funding for Gaelic medium. Now, for councils to mainstream that funding and therefore release the specific funding for new development is going to be a very tough call in the present financial climate. And again, I hope that that is handled both sensitively but firmly to try and make some progress on that. That said, I can see progress hopefully being made on all of these fronts. One of the things I want to draw attention to, is something Pauline McNeill touched on. The text of the report, but not the specific targets that I could find, talked about the 80% drop-off between primary and secondary. Now, that's a crucial part of the whole development process we're going to have to continue to tackle. It's a key issue. Glasgow is the first secondary, and it's showing the way in which that can be done, but we need to make sure we move that forward. And I was sorry not to see a specific target about how we do that into the future. There's some reference to it, but again, it's something we should look at. Presiding Officer, I've said that I wish this report well. I do. I've got some reservations about the detail. And that's why also I support our amendment, which is to keep the resources available under review. That's all that we're asking to do. In concluding, I want to associate myself with what Ted Brocklebank also said about New Zealand. I had the opportunity to be in New Zealand when I was Education Minister and spent some time looking at how they were doing Maori medium education and spoke to their equivalent of Board na Gaelic. And in fact, I was hugely impressed by what they were doing. I remember speaking to Alan Campbell, who's sitting in the gallery today, about that and trying to make sure that the board was learning the lessons from New Zealand. So I completely associate with that. And also the point he made about when you've got a confidence in your language, so much else happens about your economic development and the regeneration of your community. So, Presiding Officer, I will close at that. I know that we're running short of time, and I welcome the report, and I hope that it will make progress in the spirit I've suggested.